Record. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Just going to wait a minute or so for other people to come in the room. And we have Caitlin. Let's do make co-host. That is my Caitlin, isn't it? I did you as a co-host, and I thought I better just better just check it was you. Oh dear, it's been an absolutely frantic day today. From moment I woke up to this evening, it's been non-stop, and it still feels so surreal. Um, I don't know whether that's because the publication, partly because of Amazon, has been staggered, and I can only apologise for not having the Kindle edition properly today, um, or just because I've been waiting so long or been involved. I mean, if you think about it, the writing your book or finishing your book has been on the top of my to-do list since March 2001. So every to-do list I've written since March 2001 has write book. So to suddenly not have that on any list at all is quite disconcerting, really. Anyway, so let's kick off and I want to talk about some of the book and some of how the book came around. You're welcome to ask questions. I'll keep the chat open, and I'm going to launch a poll because I'd love to know why you're here. She says we're going to do this one and we're going to do that one, and that's really what best describes you, whether you're a job seeker, are you a friend of mine here to support me, or you just love a good party. Now I've got my fizz, as always. I have my fizz. Um, And let's talk about, first of all, how the book, what actually happened in March 2001. So at the time, I had started bookcareers.com, and it was my side hustle. I call it the ultimate side hustle because it turned into a job through unfortunate circumstances in some points, but fortunate circumstances in another. And I'd been forever promoting a book published by Kogan Page called Careers in Publishing and Bookselling. In fact, when Kogan Page published the latest edition in 1995, I was chair of the Society of Young Publishers, and our summer party became the launch party for that book. And so it was a book I supported very, very heavily. And it had been out of stock with Kogan Page for a very long time. And I was invited to the Kogan Page stand party at the London Book Fair. And the first thing I did is went up to the publishing director, who is called Philip, not Philip Kogan, who sadly is no longer with us, but was also a very good friend. And I said, when is this book going to be available again? And he said, it needs updating. We haven't got anybody to update it for us. Would you do it? And there I was at the London Book Fair, having a glass of wine in my hand, talking to a publishing director, and I said yes. And Kogan Page sent me a contract. I got invited out to lunch, so at least I experienced one publishing lunch from an author's side. And then I set on my merry way and started to do interviews. Now, at the time, the big thing in the industry was the talk of 13-digit ISBNs. So ISBNs traditionally 11 digits, or is it 9 to 10 digits? I can't remember how many digits they are. And because the industry was running out of ISBNs, that's the number on the back. And every book has its own ISBN. So if I wanted to publish this book again, but with updates, major updates, I think it's 25% of the book, I have to give it a new ISBN to um, identify it. And it's obviously International Standard Book Number. But it's actually the 13-digit ISBN is actually what's called an EAN, an European Article Number, and that 978 indicates that it's a book from the UK, I believe. Anyway, so I went off my merry little way, and the people I interviewed, the first people I interviewed was the managing director of James Askew and Son, who were the biggest library supplier in the country. So, you know, when you go to the library and you see all those shrink wrapped editions, they're all shrink wrapped and they're all got their library sticker inside. And the old plate ones used to have a card inside. That's what Askew's did. And they supplied those books directly, so they had all the labels for each library, and the libraries would order, and they'd supply the library copies directly to the public libraries. And we had a very interesting conversation. I do have these interviews all recorded on an old MP3 player. And it looks like my MP3 player is faulty. And what I'm proposing to do is to actually buy a second-hand one, a reconditioned one, and see if I can play those, transcribe those recordings, because they were fascinating. But Askews were talking very much about how they were a dying company. Oh, because that was just before all the library cuts set in. The second interview was with Graham Edmonds, who was head of book spying at WH Smith in Swindon. And that's when, in the day when you used to go to WH Smith head office, there used to be three pencils all in a kind of sculpture outside the head office. And I do believe that the day they removed the pencils is the day that the company went downhill, because they seem to have forgotten what was actually their real purpose. And for most people like me, who was at school in the late 1970s and early 1980s, every school prize was a WH Smith gift voucher. So you'd go in and you'd buy either records, this really dates it, doesn't it? Books or stationery. And that's what Smiths were really well known for. And to get a WH Smith gift voucher was fantastic, because you could go and buy things for school, or book you really wanted to read, or the latest #1 single. Definitely dated. That's lovely. Olivia says, I remember those WH Smith vouchers very well indeed. Yes. So that's where we well, so I was talking to Graham, and we were talking about the book buying and how the book buying was changing at WH Smith. And the third interview was with Lisa Milton, who's now a publishing director at HarperCollins. I believe she's not sure if she's a publisher or a publishing director, but then she was the head of Book Club Associates. And Book Club Associates were the biggest book club in the world. And if in all the Sunday supplements accompanying all the Sunday newspapers, there would be always a full-page colour ad with books that were discounted, so you could buy like the latest bestseller for £1 a copy or something, and it would tie you into basically a subscription model of books. And that book club associates started to feel the pinch when the net book agreement, which was retail price maintenance on books, so when all the books had to be sold at the published price and not discounted, and they were starting to feel the hit of that. And I think they lasted about 18 months to 2 years after that interview. And I was just realizing I'm in a world which is changing so much that if whatever I write, it will be out of date by the time I submit my manuscript. And I left it a few months. I mean, it appeared, the book was listed on Amazon. Ha 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 ha. Book was listed on Amazon, and I had a page in the Kogan Page catalogue, and I went back to them and I said, look, it's going to take me a bit longer because things are changing. And then by about 2003, 2004, went back to Kogan Page and I said, because this is before ebooks, remember? Before ebooks, it was, I think 2001 was the year that Peter Kindersley, one of the founders of Dorling Kindersley, wrote that the book was dead, the print book was dead, and CD-ROMs were here to stay. And there's a whole story in itself about how CD-ROMs, or really a Star Wars book, was the death of Dorling Kindersley as we knew it back then in the early 2000s. And I went back to Kogan Page and I said, look, I'd love to write this book, but the industry's changing so much. What I think will be best is if we cancel the contract and I go away and write the kind of book I want to write, not update this, and come back to you when I'm ready. And so they agreed, we cancelled the contract. I repaid the advance on signature and I went off on my merry little way. And the book was always in the back of my mind. And as I said, it was at the top of the to-do list forever. And I was just waiting for things to settle down. And then I had some personal issues, as most people know. I had minor car crash, major consequences in that I didn't know I had concussion, and I carried on. And what that did is that triggered a rare migraine condition, which 19 years on I still have, but thankfully, touch wood, the migraine is under control. But it left me with a permanent migraine for over 7 years. There was a gap of 7 years where my health just went on a downward spiral. And at the time of the accident, I was working as what was known as a special sales manager, which is basically I was doing business development for a book publishing sales agency. And it was my job to sell to everybody that wasn't a bookshop. So I'd be selling to mail order catalogues, I'd be selling to the stationery department of Waterstones, not the book department. I'd be selling to all the high street chains that weren't booksellers. And I'd be looking out for new business all the time. So we published a book that mentioned paints that were listed in B&Q. So it'd be my job to try and sell those books to B&Q. So I had a very, very busy job. And Book Careers then was my side hustle. And it was this thing that I'd go into some booksellers and go into some accounts, and I'd put down my business card and they'd go, oh, Suzanne Collier, that's really familiar, because it would be my sales manager business card. They're really familiar. And and why do I know your name? And then I'd say, I'm Suzanne from bookcareers.com. And they go, oh, that's it. I always thought there were two Suzanne Colliers in the industry. And I'd give them then they'd tell me about how bad their job was, and I'd give them my bookcareers.com business card. And so by day, I was a sales manager, and by night, I was a careers advisor, although not a qualified one at that time. And I've actually been giving careers advice in one form or another since 1989. Giles Clarke, the co-author of Inside Book Publishing, said of me recently that there's nobody else in the industry who's been working for decades trying to help people enter the industry. And I found that really, really quite flattering. The so there I was, and I was sales manager, and I had to give up my day job. So I had to give up being a sales manager. And thank God I had Book Careers to fall back on. And it was about the time, about 2009. So my health had just deteriorated. Then I finally, 2009, had stabilized. And because I'd had a secondary illness as well, brought on by the trauma of the migraine. And we were going through the worst of the recession in 2008. And in 2009, I saw that there were so many people losing their jobs, and I realized that it was like a call. It was really like a call to action. And so what I did is I set up a job club for all of those who were losing their jobs. I found us a meeting room. Well, actually, a friend found us a meeting room with a marketing agency, and they had a meeting room that they gave to charities and other organisations, and they allowed us to slot every week. And so I had two job clubs, one for senior people in publishing and one for, I wouldn't say entry level, but first level people in publishing. And at the start, it was just one job club, and I had over 40 people attend that first meeting in 2009. And what it was is um, I was really not in a good way. So I couldn't, because I still had a permanent migraine, had a walking stick, I couldn't deal with fluorescent lights, and I had a balance condition caused by the migraine, partly migrainous vertigo. And I would write on the whiteboard, and as I turn around to face the room, I'd have dizzy spells all the time. So I'd be clinging onto the whiteboard because I couldn't stand up unaided. I'd be clinging on the whiteboard and writing something on the whiteboard, and then turning around and holding on to a chair. And we had a breakout group in that because I realized then that I couldn't really talk. We had the room booked for 2 hours, so I couldn't really talk for longer than about 20 or 30 minutes, not like I can do now. And if at any time you want to ask me a question or you want me to move on with some of the conversation, then let me know. And in that 18 months of running the job club, first of all, what I learned was you have to push yourself, even if you feel like you can't push yourself anymore. You have to push yourself. And the second thing is in that 18 months, I helped over 40 people back to work, even though for most of those 18 months, there was a recruitment freeze because I had publicised we were running the job club, and I had a couple of publishers who had a recruitment freeze on saying, we're not allowed to advertise a job, but we've got these vacancies. Can you help? And I would for a while, we circulated a list of people who were in the job club. And then one of the recruitment consultants who's no longer with us took a bit of umbrage at that. And so we had to stop that. But we tried to talk to publishers. I tried to talk to publishers about what vacancies they had coming up. Now, I'm not a recruitment consultant, and that's never been something that I want to do because I always want to be on your side. And I think when you're selling jobs, and I'm not, no offense, recruitment consultants are lovely and Inspired are absolutely amazing. And also Redwood. I'm really, really impressed in how both of those recruitment consultants consistently offer high level service to candidates as well as employers. But it's not something I'm particularly drawn to because I'm particularly the kind of person who likes to put myself in your shoes and see, but use all my publishing knowledge. And so we got over a 40 people back into work in 18 months. And then I spent more time as my health slowly improved. Um, I started to do more and more with book careers and be very balanced about how many hours I could work. I was only working a few hours a week. And as much as, you know, I always say that book careers saved me because if I hadn't have had book careers, I wouldn't have had the motivation or the drive or the platform to move myself forward. And you do have to push yourselves in times like that. And then we get to about 2012, and I'd been writing for Publishing Talk magazine, run by John Reed. I'd written some articles for him, and he said, "When are you going to finish your book?" And that's when I started to take the book off the back burner because I thought, yeah, things have changed in the industry. And I started to take the book in the back off the back burner and do bits and pieces, but not really seriously. And then in 2016, and as you know, 2016 was a terrible year because that's the year that I believe we lost Prince, David Bowie, and who else? There was somebody else really big that went as well that year. But in the book industry, I went to 10 funerals and about four other memorials. And one of those funerals was for Carol Blake, absolutely supreme literary agent. And her book, From Pitch to Publication, um, if you can find a secondhand copy of this, it's still worth a read. It's about everything you know about getting your novel published. And I realized then how fragile life is because we lost her so quickly. And that's when I really started to put my head down and write my book. I worked with Alison Jones through her 10-day business book challenge to help me structure the chapters, although the final chapter structure is very, very different to what I planned in the 10-day business book challenge. And then I started writing. Or what I did is I found that most people write, they say authors, or you need to write 1,000 words a day, or you need to make the writing a habit, do it at the same time every day. And I think that's fine for some writing. And when I've been writing other things, because I've got about, I think, 5,000 words of a novel, about 28,000 words of a book about my illness and recovery. And I think it's fine when you've got set things, but when the book is about your job, Um, and every conversation, as Caitlin, who's my assistant, come marketing executive, come friend, she's just brilliant. She's absolutely, she bought me a card today. Isn't that cute? She bought me a card. I just love her to bits. I'm so pleased and lucky to be working with her. And Caitlin, I forgot what I was going to say, but I was, I found that every conversation I have with a client leads to three more actions that are nothing to do with that client, whether it's, oh, I must look this up, oh, I must do this, oh, I must. And what I found is that what I needed to do, and this is a great tip if you need a writing retreat, is to find a caravan park near you that has absolutely nothing on it for you, to book for to Monday to Friday in term time, so it's dead quiet and also dead cheap. Don't take the Wi-Fi, and just go and stock up, do a big shop, plan your meals, stock up all ready meals, all snacks and stuff, but plan a couple of meals out somewhere local so you've got some respite, and just sit there and write. And nobody around you really knows you. So if you go out, you're not really bothered that you haven't brushed your hair or washed your hair, or you've got no makeup on, or you're wearing just, I might say your pajamas. I mean, I live in Essex. Would you believe when I went in Tesco's on Southend, I think on Sunday, there was a woman walking around there in her pajamas. Oh, no, I'm sure there's a very good reason for it, but there are some things that are just um I would say that when I start walking around in my pajamas and I'm not just putting the rubbish out very early on a Tuesday morning, that's when you all need to ask questions about how well I am. But it's that kind of thing that you're in an environment where your whole focus is writing, and during that first deep dive, I think I wrote over 25,000 words that were from blogs. I rewrote them, updated them, and I had this amazing wall full of post-it notes of all the things that I wanted to write. I should have found the photo of that. I might take a break in a minute and see if I can find that for you. But I had all these post-it notes. There are still a few post-it notes behind me. I don't know if you can see somewhere on the wall. And those are all of the online resources that I've been so caught up with so many things, because this book was meant to come at the beginning of February, but thanks to Amazon, I had to delay publication. So it was meant to be all nice out at the beginning of February, and then I'll spend the rest of February working on all our events for the book fair. And yesterday I was at the Independent Publishers Guild conference. It was on again today, but I didn't go today too. So it's like, boom, all these things happening at the same time. So I managed to write, and I got to about, I think, 90,000 words by the start of May 2019. And then I don't want to go into too much detail about what happened. But basically, I had the neighbours from hell move in the flat below me. And I can see some of my friends smiling here. And I had, they finally got evicted in December 2022, but I had noise 24/7, and it was impossible to, I had to stop seeing clients in my home. I had to just stop. We'd be on a job club meeting on Zoom, and all you'd hear would be screaming and shouting. It was really quite appalling. And then finally, I moved in January 2023, before the other new neighbours moved in downstairs to me. and I this time to a semi-detached house. I was very, very careful that I didn't want to be in a flat for quite some time. And I've only got neighbours on one side who are lovely and as peaceful as anything. But you start to realise how much noise you can hear. Um, and I'm out by in Leigh-on-Sea now, so I can go for beach walks and things like that, which is really quite so good for the soul, so good for the soul. And I'd moved here. I sort of spent about 3 or 4 months unpacking boxes of books. I think when I moved, I had 43 boxes of books. Uh, and all the books are all in the other room, and I still haven't sorted them out. And I keep saying to Caitlin, she's going to have to come here one day, and we really are going to sort out what books I want to keep and what books really should go. But I mean, I've been in book publishing for 42 years now, so I've got such an emotional connection to some of those books. Some of them I've worked on, um, some of them I promised people I'd read, and there's 1 or 2 books that were published at my suggestion. And that's one of the things about careers in book publishing, is that even though most of my career was in sales, I can probably name at least 6 books that were published at my suggestion, or I had an input. There were even other books that I had inputs into covers. So in my early career, I worked for Andre Deutsch when Andre ran the company. And I was joined there when I was 16. And when I was about 17, 18, they started publishing what teen fiction, which was the big thing before it was called YA. It was called teen fiction. And they their series of paperbacks were called Adlib, which I thought was fantastic name, which was basically AD Andre Deutsch Library, and it was Adlib. In fact, this really dates this because that Adlib originally came. We had a telex machine, and our telex, and people, I reckon some people are like, a telex? A telex was a kind of computer that you sat and typed a message in and then sent it down an electronic wire. And then it would come back on it, they'd respond. And it was how you communicated internationally with different publishers and customers worldwide. And I always knew if I was sending a telex to Australia, if I did it before I left for the end of the day, when I came in the next morning, I'd have a response. So our telex number, Andre Deutsch, was 261026 Adlib G. So that's where part of the Adlib came from. And the children's publishing director, Pamela Royds, she suddenly realized that she had her own teenager in the building. And she and the children's publicity manager, Sarah Allison, both came and sought me out and said, we're making these jacket decisions or cover decisions. Which one? We realised we've got our own teenager in the business, in the building. Which one do you like best? So some of the covers of the books were influenced by me when I was like 17, 18. And I've been trying to collect some of them again from secondhand bookstores and things. So no matter what role you're in, you can influence something in one of the books. One of the books we published at Aurum, the publisher gave me to read, because I was training to be an aerobics teacher and had such a interest in health and fitness. And she gave it to me to read and write a report on what I thought of it. And so there's all that kind of involvement that you get. So here we are. I was 23. I moved in, And then I kept picking up the book from time to time. But as I say, I found that trying to do 1,000 words or do some review bits every day was just not working for me. And then I realized actually, I was thinking, oh, should I go to a caravan? I was thinking, well, actually, I've got my own caravan here now. This was the whole point of me moving and being available, being a little bit quieter. Um, and one of the things was the amount of case studies and excerpts, and I'll talk you through the book. I'll show you some sample pages in a moment. And I found a way. I put out so many requests because I run a job club. I put out so many requests saying, love to use anybody would like to be part of a case study, send me your CV. And I'd come back to you and wouldn't use anything without your permission. And that's the thing, anything you say to me as a client, any documents you share to me are confidential. If I want to use something, I will always, always, always ask permission. I never use anything without full permission for somebody. I just want to reiterate that to give you all confidence. Is if you think, oh, if I send her this, she's going to use it in this. And I'm like, no, really, really clear about that. And then back in July last year, so we got to 2024, and Giles Clarke, who's the co-author of Inside Book Publishing, who I've known since I first joined the Society of Young Publishers in 1988. So I knew Giles Clarke before he was a published author, and his book, I think, took 10 years. And in fact, Inside Book Publishing, she says, if you see it, there's a new edition coming out. This is Inside Book Publishing. And I'll see if I can just find, this is what it is now. And this is what it was in 1989 when it was first published. Tiny little book. So I was at his party at his house, and he said to me, Suzanne, I really need your book to be published before the next edition of Inside Book Publishing comes out. He said, when is your book coming? And he gave me such a kick up the backside that I just thought, I cannot miss this opportunity. And I left that party and I started trying to make time to write. And I'd sorted out some weeks in September and October, and I'd planned to have the first draft written by the time I went to the Frankfurt Book Fair in mid-October, but that just didn't happen. And then when I came back from Frankfurt, I came back with the inevitable Frankfurt cold. You either go to the Frankfurt Book Fair with a cold or you come back from the Frankfurt Book Fair with a cold. It doesn't matter which way, but you will get the Frankfurt cold because it's a bit like Fresher's flu, is that there's people from all over the world in a very confined space that's usually very warm, and you're all shoulder to shoulder, that if somebody's got a cold, you can guarantee they'll pass it on to you. And so I came back from Frankfurt. I had a couple of weeks where I wasn't great. And then I put my head down and I worked and I worked and I worked. And I kept postponing the date it was going to my editor. In fact, what I started to do was send him chapters. I don't know if he's here this evening. It's David Ballheimer. And when I told some of my publishing friends, because they said, oh, you're sending it out to be copy edited. And I said, no, I'm sending it out for a full developmental edit. They all said, that is very brave. And I said, I've taken so long over this book. I want it to be the best book that it possibly could be. And David, God bless him, I've known him actually since I was 15. And I didn't know he worked in book publishing until I think I was 23, 24. Um, and he worked for Paul Hamlin, and but he was also the press officer of Hendon FC, and I support Dagenham and Redbridge. And at one time we were in, well, pre-merger, we were in the same league, the same division. One of the pre-merger teams of Dagenham and Redbridge was Leytonstone Ilford. And that's where I knew him from. I knew him from football, and we just ended up having a conversation. And then I found out he worked in publishing, and obviously we've become great friends. And I had no shortage of editors to go to. Absolutely, as you can imagine, somebody in my position, the amount of editors I've worked with, helped get jobs, helped build their freelance career, had no shortage. But what I really wanted was, first of all, someone I could trust to do an absolutely fantastic job, and somebody who would really do a good developmental edit and structural edit to make sure this book was good. And secondly, I wanted someone who would stand up to me, someone that wouldn't just, oh, Suzanne, it's Suzanne, we just got to go with Suzanne, but somebody who'd actually say, actually, Mrs., you need to reframe this. And that's what I got. And the third thing, I said two things. The third thing is this book is my voice. And as Publishing Scotland said, Marion Sinclair from Publishing Scotland said, you can feel Suzanne cheering you on as you go through the chapters. And that's what I really wanted, was somebody who'd do a structural edit, but who'd retain my voice. And David has been expert at that. And I can't thank him enough. The other person, and she's in the room, is Zara Thatcher. Hello, Zara. Zara is the typesetter. And when you look at how complex the layouts are, and I'll take you through this because I've waffled enough about some of my career. I will take you through this. I'm going to share screen. And she says, oh, I've closed the document. That's very, very clever, isn't it? That's very, very clever. So I'm going to find it again. It's that one, aha. And hold on, we'll come out of that and that. And I'm going to share screen now. I'm going to show you. Now, the first thing is, these are the chapters. And this structure is quite different, because one of the things where I kept getting stuck with was the chapter on interviews, because I couldn't work out. I mean, it was about 100 pages in itself, and I couldn't work out what the best way was to organize the questions and the processes and all other things. And so basically, chapters 1 to 6 have been written perfectly since 2019. And chapter 7, 8, and 9 were all one chapter. And then I had a brainwave, because I just thought, well, I need to break this down. And I thought, is it okay to have 2 chapters on interviews? And then finally, we get to 3 chapters. And so I've pulled all of these out. The other thing was this chapter, recruitment practices and selection. And in fact, if you ask me which chapters I'm proudest of in the book, it's number 4, recruitment practices and selection, and number 9, interview tests and how to pass them. But we'll talk you through everything has an illustration. So that's what the illustrator Chris Target did of me, when I'd asked him for a set of illustrations and gave him some chapter headings, and that he added that one in as a bonus. I think, yes, except she's got a waist, and at the moment, sitting on my backside for 6 months writing and editing, I have no waist left at all. I think I've got two waists rather than one and several chins, but hey ho. So let's just look at this. So these are other people to thank. A huge people, huge list, and I've realised I've left some people out. And so in the next time I update the files, I will add in some names here. Certain people and certain people who are in the room is Anne Nolan. Thank you, Anne. I think you'll find you're mentioned here. And so Anne did a brilliant job. She read through the different departments of understanding book publishing, advised me about the marketing, about what was missing from the marketing section, but also read through things with a view to ensure I'd included enough bits about academic publishing. And we had a good conversation about that. And that's not just Anne, but there's several other people within the industry. So the right section on rights was reviewed by Diane Spivey, who is the former rights director of Hachette and now an independent consultant. She's an absolute expert on rights, and she read through everything. The person who's an expert on metadata read through all the bits on metadata, and there's loads of other paragraphs and chapters which were all sent out for peer review, like the recruitment consultants reread the pages on recruitment consultants. I just want to this dedication is my Bubba Adelaide Rose. She was born at a time when women didn't have the opportunities that we have today, and she was never without a book in her hand. Would have loved to have worked in book publishing. She went blind in later years, completely blind, and I introduced her to audiobooks. But she loved me sitting there. She'd ask me so much about my work, whatever I was doing, and my job. And she just used to listen, fascinated about how a book was put together. Now, this is every chapter has a cartoon or drawing, and every chapter has a quote. And some are funny, some are serious, some are from me. But that's how every chapter starts. And every chapter, she says, I'm going to scroll down. So if you've got migraine and this makes you feel dizzy or sick, every chapter, oh, this is interesting. So this is how the publishing industry has changed. So when I first started giving talks about publishing in about 1989, I probably used this slide. Then by the early 2000s, I might have been using this slide. So you see, publishing was really quite flat. We were all quite equal. And then we started to merge a little bit in departments or become more collaborative. I mean, it's always been a collaborative industry, but certain departments would be closer than others. And if I looked at how publishing is now, it probably looks a bit like this. And one of the things, if you're job seeking, I really want to point out is this bit, this finance, resources, and IT. As you see, it was like out there, it was out on a limb here. But everything now in publishing, every strategy, even if you're in human resources, you're involved in planning the company strategy. So don't think, oh, I have to work in editorial or I have to work in marketing. Look for some of these non-departmental jobs, because I think you'll learn a lot, but you also might find that you progress quicker and are more involved in the strategic running of the business than if you're in actually one of the creative, what I might call a creative department. And you can be just as creative in this. And then we have, she says, so let's talk about Zara's work because this is just so good. So we have top tips and we have top tips, but we have anecdotes that are in a different box. We have case studies that are in a different box. But if you look at this for a typesetter, this must have been a nightmare job. I don't know if Zara wants to comment on that, but this must have been a nightmare job because there's so many different layouts. But every chapter, or the first chapters of the first 10 chapters, because those are all about job searching in publishing, is an exercise and action points. And then we come to getting started. And these first two chapters are written as though you have no knowledge of book publishing at all. Oh, that's nice. Zara really enjoyed it. Smiley face. Zara, I really enjoyed working with you. And if you ever need a typesetter in the future, then Zara is the person to go to because this stuff is just exemplary. And I mean, this is one of the things why I spent a lot of time and money doing the editorial of the book because I don't know if you've realized we work in book publishing, and this is a book about book publishing, and that whilst anybody who might read it might be at any level, some of the senior people in the industry are going to read it. Some of them have, and I might come on to that. Some of them have already. And I didn't want them to think that this was a rushed book, a rubbish book, that it wasn't up to standard. And there's things, as I was going to say, so we've got different bits and pieces like origins of a degree requirement, about choosing a graduate degree of publishing and studying for a master's, and if you should do a PhD. And all this master's section, I'd written it, and Helena Marku, who's a lecturer at Oxford Brookes, went through it for me. So everything, and also the bit about PhDs, everything has had contributions from across the industry in one way or another. So, I mean, these case studies, and we've got all the different options. So, these first two chapters are for people who have no knowledge. You know, if you're somebody who's outside the industry or you're in a college education and you're thinking, do I have to go to university? How do I get in publishing? This all has this things. And this is what I mean about not losing my voice. Is that there's some choosing a work experience placement, there's case studies about placements, there's what you're expected to do, but golden rules for work experience. This is interesting about the origins of unpaid work experience, where that came from. But this is what it says, is it's this bit, when this is a message for publishers, really, because it says that if you're interning or doing work experience placement, paid, always work paid. Only time you should ever work for free is when maybe you're volunteering for a genuine charity and while working on your hobbies. Anything else, you really should be paid. And publishers with shareholders are not charities. Now, so you're in a job, you're in a work experience placement, and yeah, woohoo! You get invited to a job interview at a publisher, and you're like, how am I going to get time off? And this is my message, and this is what I mean about not losing a voice, is you should always be allowed to go to a job interview whilst completing a placement. If the publisher stops you or makes it difficult, then please show them this and tell them I will have words with them. And there's other messages like that in the book, throughout the book, particularly in the how to get the career you deserve. So this is the thing, there's a bit for career changers and other things, but preparing. And there's 30 things you can do instead of working in an unpaid internship. And most of those you can do while you're still in education. So this is what I really wanted to do, make this the best book. And then we've got Finding Jobs. And one of the things I had on my job club when Chris originally submitted the illustrations, I went through them with my job club at the time, and we wanted to make sure they were as diverse and inclusive and representative as possible. And you'll see each of the illustrations, it includes everybody, really inclusive. With one of them, we modified at the last time, but this Finding Jobs lists all the different things you can do to find jobs that are not advertised or to put yourself out there. So all the different things and places to look for jobs. And this, I said, the recruitment consultants, I wrote this and they just modified a few little bits and pieces. So everything's had some peer review in some way or another. And then we come on to there's a bit about networking, there's a bit about book fairs, other ways to find jobs or be headhunted, and there'll be some extra resources. I said at the beginning of the book, there'll be some extensive resources. Some of them are just part of the Book Careers website, but there's loads of other things that I've still got to do. This is how to use a book fair, how to use a trade show. And this was originally partly a well, it turned out to be a podcast episode, but how this originated was I was working with a publishing director who was in fear of their company being taken over, excuse me, and then being or merging with another publisher. And they were really worried about how up to date their industry knowledge was of their competitors and their lists and things. They were really worried they were stale. And so this part, number 7, about look at the stands of the exhibitors you want to see and note the following, came out of a coaching session that I had with the publishing director and helped to bring her skills up to date. But this recruitment practices and selection is, I interviewed, I say 300, but it's way, way more than that because most of the people that I know in the industry, I'd go to, and I can see Anne smiling here, is because I'd go to a publishing party or I'd go to a conference or an event or even a book launch and I'd see somebody I'd know and I'd say, hey, how are you? Lovely to see you. Could I just ask you a quick question? And oh, I saw you were advertising for this job. Can you tell me how you sifted through the applications, and how you made that decision? And I was spoken to hundreds and hundreds of people, literally, I say over 300, but it's way, way more than that. In this, what I've actually done is I've talked about how I've got the results of how publishers select a shortlist and sift through applications. And this is just some real life examples. And I'll just give you an idea of this one. They received 200 applications, read every one, and sifted this down to 60 by ring fencing the people who'd aligned themselves to the company in their covering letter and answered the question in an advertisement. So when a publisher asks you a question in an advertisement, that's part of the pre-screening test or the screening test to get the job. But it's this kind of thing. So we've got at least, I think it's 11, I can't count very well. I think it's 11 examples. And then we talk about all the different recruitment practices, such as a sample job advertisement that's an editorial test. and then writing 500 words, doing a video. So there's and more with the application questions, application forms, and assignments, so that you have a clear idea if you're job seeking of what's expected of you. And there's things about assessment centres, which are a nightmare in further chapter. And if you just want to remember one thing from this evening, one thing that I ever tell you, oh, that's meant to be my epitaph, Caitlin. Is it's we were talking about this afternoon. I want you to remember this because I'll forget it. So my epitaph is she read and understood instructions. But that's the thing. Just remember to read and understand instructions. It will change your life. That talks about why you don't get rejection letters. It's an exercise action points. Now this was one of the things that held me up was the number of case studies that I wanted, a number of real life examples. And some of you, oh, even though most of us are relatively intelligent people, that intelligence goes out the window when it comes to writing our own CV. Yes. And I've worked with publishing directors, editors, marketers, publicity. I've worked on so many people, and their CVs are terrible, absolutely terrible. And then I say to them, particularly an editor, and I say, "Well, you need to do an editorial job on this. Why haven't you done an editorial job on this?" And they're like, oh, oh, oh. Um, so what I did and how I got round this, 'cause not having the examples I wanted, is as I was writing this or reviewing this chapter, is I'd make a clear list of the examples that I wanted. And then I'd put a post on LinkedIn that would say author request. And I'd have a day booked out in my diary and with a calendar app. And people would respond on LinkedIn either by message or to the post. I'd then message them back, but I'd have a look at their LinkedIn profile to see if they had the experience that I was looking for, the background I was looking for, because there's some very precise examples. And then I would, if they did, I'd invite them to book in an appointment for that particular day. And I'd made it clear I want them on that particular day when I'd put the post on LinkedIn. And that is how I got most of the examples that I needed. And I'm just sharing that with you because if you're ever doing something that needs examples, um, if you're ever doing something that needs examples, that this is the best way to do it. This really was. And if I was doing a similar book, which I am, I've got two more books planned. If I'm doing a similar book, then that is exactly what I would do. And you'll see. So we go through this, but as you go through, you'll see, where are we? Here we are. We go through examples and we go through, sorry, it goes to here we are, tools, because I call it tools. Whether you use a strap line, a personal profile, a heading, it's a strap line, isn't it? Or put your key skills or separate out your experience. Those are what I call tools. And these are the five main tools: jumping straight in with your employment history, heading or strap line, personal profile, key skills, and separating out your experiences. You can use a combination of those all on your CV. It all depends on what the message is that you're trying to get across when applying for the job. So this is the thing, is that as we go down, this is before, and this is an after, and this is an after again. So a couple of them is that we'd worked on this, and then I think this might be the one where it was a client, and the client had sent me this, and I'd had a call with them, and then they sent me something back, and then I sent it back to them improved even further. And so this is real examples of things of how before and after for so many different departments, rights, career change and marketing, editorial. And then it teaches you how to write your bullet points on your CV, whether it's for the key skills or anything else. And I've created a CAN acronym, context, achievement, numbers, or people. What the skill was, how did you use it, how well you did it, without any notable successes, numbers, or people. And it's all about, it's all these different examples at every level of how you'd rewrite those bullet points if you're going to use bullet points on your CV, and how to read it, how, and all the other things. I mean, this, how to describe placements. There is so much information in this chapter, but kind of course there's action points, there's an exercise and action points. And then we come on to covering letters. I love this. These illustrations are fab. And this came out of a conversation at an SYP conference, probably about 20 years ago, when they were talking about doing video CVs for the first time. And Charlotte Hussein was then the Director of Human Resources at Wiley. She's long since left there. And she said to me, nothing excites me more than reading a well-written covering letter. And I use that in. Now this, I have tested this. And so much of what I've put into this book, I've tested, and I've analysed the psychology of the recruiter. By recruiter, I don't just mean recruitment consultants, I mean the person actually recruiting for the job, about what covering letters get the best response. And if you write, I would like to apply for the role of, in your first sentence, you are more likely to get invited to an interview than if you write, Faber and Faber are an amazing publisher and I really want to work for you. And it's really interesting about that. Now, this covering letter chapter, obviously it's got loads of stuff in it, but what we do, what I show you how to do is a practical example of how to write a covering letter. And this has a real job advertisement. It's been anonymized, but it's a real job advertisement that I had permission to use for the book. And I just changed a couple of details about what they were doing. And this, imagine the person, this is somebody's real background. So the only thing I've changed is the genre, and I've used books by Rethink Press. And I show you how to break down that advertisement and read and understand it. And you'll see from all these bits that are here that you've got the start of your covering letter. And then you bring all your points together. And this has got the start of the main part of the covering letter. And then I turn it into a letter. And this is the final example. So you can see the whole process. And I think that's really, really important for anybody who's job seeking, is that not so much, because you see lots of people sharing their covering letters in some Facebook groups and stuff, but it's really not helpful, because very often you don't know, the person who might have got the job still doesn't know what it was that made the publisher pick them. So it's really important. And also, what worked for one person doesn't work for another. But this formula works over and over again because it changes to the tone of the advertisement. And that's really key. And then there's loads of checks. And I have to keep reminding people that it's a publishing business, it's a words business, and some things that might not be important in other industries are really quite important in publishing. Now, this chapter, this is the first of the three interview chapters, and I had to reword. There's certain things I've had to reword because of when I wrote it 20 odd years ago. It was okay to be sound quite discriminatory, but it's not okay to be sound quite discriminatory now. And it's really important to point out this is not discriminatory, it's not unconscious bias or enforced prejudices. But no matter what happens in job interviews in the future, the three things that will help you succeed is understanding that publishers looking for, can I work with you? Can you do the job and will you fit in? And they're looking at in relation to the culture of the company, the job, and whether the team as well. And really, have you got the skills for the job? Because, and I'm sure Anne will agree here, is that one of the things when you're interviewing as a manager is that you know that your colleagues will be judging you by the appointment that you make. And in some, yeah, and in some times, oh, can I just show you? I bought myself a publication day gift, and it's a ring in Book Careers colours. And I saw it in it's second hand. I saw it in the jewellers in December, and my friends said that suggested that I should buy it to myself as a publication day gift. And I went back to this morning and I couldn't believe it hadn't been sold. So it's got topaz and amethyst on white gold, and I just bought that for me today. Anyway, sorry, I really digress. But one of the things is that in certain companies I've worked in, that they're just like, oh God, look who they've hired, because they always never make their probation, or somebody, a manager, just gets a reputation for making wrong hiring decisions. So it's why publishers, anybody in any job, any industry, is always thinking, how's this, what my colleagues going to think as well. Now, this bit on interview research, this section has been written so you can use this as a checklist for each and every interview. So you go through this, and it's quite considerable. So much information here, but it will really help you. And there's about what you should wear to an interview. And then we come on to the next chapter, and that is on interview questions. She says interview questions. There's so much stuff here. So it's why I call it. Okay. And as I said, we wanted to be inclusive. And so this is the interviewer in the wheelchair, and this is the candidate. And when this was originally drawn, it was the other way round. So we made the interviewer in the wheelchair and not the candidate. So we thought that was far more inclusive. People can see themselves represented. Now, so such thing as a stupid question, only stupid answers. And these are kind of types of questions. And there's a bit in here, we talk about the STAR. Most of you who've been to job interviews, been trained or had some kind of interview coaching, have probably been told about the STAR method. And this talks you through the STAR method, and then it tells you why the STAR method doesn't work, so that you understand the STAR method, because it can help you if you're really unsure of how to try and answer some questions. But what I've seen in the last 5 or 6 years is that candidates take the STAR method far too literally, and it just becomes a very boring and monotonous answer. Whereas you need to be authentic, it needs to be keep it real. And what we have here is 10 things, she says. Hold on. Is it here or is it further back? Okay, there are 10 scenarios to find in your career history that will answer almost every single interview question, because one answer will answer many questions, like a success, a mistake, um, the worst situation you've been in. And this is where we've got some real examples, and this is true. And this is really, really true. Is On the day of the 7/7 London bombs, I was due to present at Gardner's, the major book wholesaler in the UK, and I had some huge, huge targets. And I was driving down and I was listening to all the news unfold. And when I got there, I had a brand new buyer, so I couldn't get a hug or anything like that. But we quickly built rapport because he was just about worried about his friends and family as I was. And we had a chat, and then I said we'd better do some work. And my mind had gone blank of everything in my presentation. And I switched on my laptop and I pressed the start button. And the first title that came up was Worst Case Scenario Extreme Edition. And I mean, emotions were heightened that day. And I just wanted to burst into tears, fall through the floor. And I couldn't talk about the book. I couldn't say, is it better to be bitten by an alligator or a shark? How do you stop a runaway train? I couldn't talk about it. So I had to tell them what quantity I was looking for, what I could do to support an order that size. And I left them with the information and to come back to me once they considered the title. And they came back to me a few days later with the right information, with the right an order of the right size. But that answer shows not just worst situation or difficult situation, but a time I had to think on my feet, build rapport, um, uncomfortable. How do I deal with a brand new buyer? And I have mentioned here, it is better to be bitten by an alligator than a shark because you're more likely to survive an alligator bite than a shark bite. And I put that in because I reckon anybody reading that will instantly Google, is it better to be bitten by an alligator or a shark? So I've saved you the trouble. And I'm so proud I still remember that like 20 odd years on. And when you work with others as a team, and then we come through interview questions, actual questions. There are over 150 genuine interview questions here that I have been collating for years. And I'm going to pick on Anne again because I think she might recognize one or two of these. I think she might recognize one or two of these. So there's loads that are just for any assistant level or internship roles, anything that's like an entry level role. Then you've got for academic publishing. Um, I think, why do you want to work in academic publishing specifically? Oh, this is it. Are you going to stop your education at this point? Is there any reason you're not studying for a master's or PhD? Literary agents assistant, children's and educational publishing, editorial assistant, marketing assistant. So you got a good idea, if you're looking for an entry level job, what interview questions you might get asked at that level. And then you've got action points. I haven't done an exercise in that because I think going through the interview questions is uh, ex action exercise enough. Now this is the other chapter I'm really proud of, and this is interview tests. So um, and this is another quote. Sometimes it feels like the publisher is asking you to stand on your head, sing a Beatles song backwards in order to prove that you've the skills and competencies for the job advertised. And this is a very old-fashioned test, but it's still coming up. It's putting things in alphabetical order on pen to paper. So in this example, it says this is all the countries, and you've got files for all the countries. Sort them into alphabetical order. There's an Excel test, a PowerPoint test. Now, the prioritization test, I'm not going to spoil it for you because I want you to really enjoy this one. The prioritization test, I sent this to 6 industry professionals to test it. And each came back with a different order. It was quite funny, but their order related to the job that they were doing or the department or function they were doing. So I can understand that. Um, but when you're looking for an entry level job now, you'll very, very often be given a very similar prioritization test to see how well you are at thinking about things, putting things in order. And all the answers for these are in the back. There's a proofreading test, a maths test, and a scenario test to write an email, a spelling test, a copywriting test, and this one, um, there's one this for this copywriting test, this rights awareness test and sales and special sales test. If you're stuck for a book, this says why not use this book as an example? If you're stuck for a book, use this book, particularly the copywriting test, to write. There's one that's a social media test to write a social media type post. So if you're going to get the book and you do that, then make sure you tag in Book Careers, and we're on almost every platform as Book Careers, all one word. And then we talk about other tests, and then you've got all the answers. I'm going to scoot through those. Now, this is where we go to going freelance. So, at some point in your career, you might consider going freelance. And this isn't just about the work, but this is how you set up a freelance business and how, if you're looking for work as a freelance, what you should do and how to just, well, really where to find work, but other bits and pieces. So, Readsy, I wrote that and I sent it to Readsy to check that they agreed with that. And the same as the CIEP. So many people, there's a case study there. And this is really important. I do not at any time in my or your career endorse unpaid work experience, or working for free. I can't emphasize that enough. And it's about setting your fees, calculating your daily rate. And then we come, there's action points, and then we come to how to get the career you deserve. And this talks about, well, there's my saying, and many of you know me. I always say this at the end of everything I ever do. May you all be doing a job you love and being paid the salary you so richly deserve. And about accepting a job. When you get more than one job offer at the same time, I've lost count the number of people that have gone through this with me. That, you wait ages for a job and suddenly 2 or 3 come at the same time. You have to make a decision. And this is not unusual when you've started a job and the job you were interviewing for elsewhere that you really, really wanted, suddenly out of the blue, come and work for us, and you've started somewhere else and you really want to go and work. This talks about how to resign from a situation like that, talks about your first day. Now, this is really important. And I haven't mentioned this, and I will mention this in a job club. I purposely didn't mention it in the book because I didn't want to give publishers the heads up. Didn't want to give the bosses the heads up. So it says, be ready to write notes with your own notepad and pen, even though the company may supply you with them when you arrive. So one of my last jobs, I bought my own notebook and I wrote on it everything you need to know. Okay. Because it's my notebook and most of it's just scrawls with no real coherent stuff. It's just got like one words and two words things was to remind me it was my property and I could take it with me when I left, even though some of it might be classed as company confidential information. It's not really, just notes about customers and things to remind me. And that's why I always recommend using your own notebook when you first go to a job. So you can write things down and it's your notebook. Unless the company's paid you for that notebook, they really don't have, they might ask you to scroll through things, but it's your notes. It's your notes, your notebook. They're not going to question why you take it out of the building. Just a little tip. Anyway, see. Some people might argue with me that, but I always say your notebook, as long as you're not stealing company information and it's just notes you might have made to remind yourself who people are and stuff. So your first day, now this is really important. Company confidentiality is that it's really easy to get caught up when you got a publishing job and you're new in your career and you think you just, wow. In my case, wow, there's Donny Osmond just come into the building. And I'd just go to, you'd be really tempted to take to social media and post, you'll never guess who just came in the building today. That is company confidential information and it can get you fired if you share it. Because the publisher might be trying to poach an author, poach a celebrity, or if you know that the celebrity's up for grabs, another publisher could see that and think, oh, let's just contact their agent and put in a higher offer. So you have to be really, really careful. And this company confidentiality, people tweet about their jobs, post about their jobs, everything, treat everything as confidential unless you've been given permission to post it. I have seen too many people fired because of what they post on social media. It's a little bit about relationships with colleagues and when things go wrong and not making your probation and then career planning. So this really is such a full book of everything. Haven't even finished yet. Now this is the last words really. Go out into the work, go out in the world and create your own situation for career success. Now, questions, answers, and jargon busters. These are the questions that I get asked the most, like how do I stand out? And it directs you back to the chapters or gives you part of the answer. But it's this thing about I'm always getting first interviews but never getting invited back or offered a role. There's a whole bit on second interviews and how to read the signposts of first interviews to understand what's at second interviews. And then we have the jargon buster. Now, this, Caitlin will attest to this, is she's one of the 3 people I had go through publishing job advertisements and make a note of any words that they thought needed an explanation. So some of these are not just publishing words, like there's an example or definition of what working knowledge is as opposed to demonstrable knowledge. But there are quite a lot of publishing terms in here. So if you're really trying to help you, I hate the word demystify, but really trying to help you break down and understand read and understand what a job advertisement's asking you for. And then we have the appendices, and the appendices we've got these are all meant to be all the online resources, useful hashtags, apprenticeships, all useful web addresses for so many different things. And then we have a recommended reading list as well of books about publishing. Now, I've spoken for way too long. Questions? Anybody got any questions they want me to answer before we wrap up? Just put something in the chat or you can raise your hand and ask. So please. I see we've got book binging blog here. Hello, book binging blog. Lovely to see you. I hope you found it interesting. So just ask me any questions. You can take yourself off mute. I don't mind. Uh,
Sorry, didn't get quite a lot of it. I was on the train, but I just thought I'd
oh,
join because I
well,
was
I've
very excited
recorded
about your
it.
book coming out.
I've
Uh,
recorded it, so we can. I might put it on YouTube. Thank
I
you.
was very excited about catching it, especially because I know of your expertise and you've helped me with this previously. And just so you're aware, it so happens that I've resigned yesterday, so it comes at the best time.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. Well, um, I hope it's a good reason why you resigned, not a bad reason. No, and are you coming to the London Book Fair? Have you got a ticket for the London Book Fair?
Yeah, I've got a month's notice. It's fine.
Right, okay. So you'll be at the London Book Fair because we've got three career related events, and also the SYP, Society of Young Publishers, has some career related events, and two of them are on the Tuesday, and then we have our careers clinic on the Thursday, where we have Bonnie A. Bloomsbury. Oh God, Hachette, HarperCollins, Springer Nature, Oxford University Press. I've been after Oxford University Press for years, and they're actually coming. Oxford University Press, and there's others as well. I can't remember them all. Pam Macmillan, and we have the recruitment teams. Now they don't have jobs, but it's where you can sit in front of them. It's career speed dating. You can sit in front of them for 5 minutes. We have a bell system, although sometimes the book fair uses their klaxon, and we move people around. And it's actually the 18th careers clinic I've organised. So I always describe it as 2 hours of the most perfectly organised chaos. Because if you look at the room and you look at the queue and you think, oh, this looks so chaotic, but and Caitlin will tell you, is that as after every careers clinic, the next morning, we're sitting down and we are going through absolutely all the comments, all the things that went wrong, but not many things now, touch wood, but all the things that went right, what worked, what didn't work, that we go through it all and we instantly make adjustments to all our instructions for the next year to make sure, while it's all fresh in our heads, that it improves on the next year. So we work very, very hard on that. And that's why I call it perfectly organized chaos, because it feels very chaotic. And after 18 years, we just really work so hard every year to make it a great experience for all the people attending, the advisors and the candidates, because I know how important it is. And this is why I drag the publishers along, although so many come willingly. Um, is why we really encourage the publishers to participate because it just gives you a face of of somebody who's actually receiving your CV or actually posting the job advertisement. But no, but make sure you come and talk to me and we'll see what we can do. Okay. There's also a virtual clinic on the Friday if nobody can get to the book fair. And if you go to bookcareers.com/London underscore 2025, that should give you all the information about what we're doing at the book fair.